So this one's going to be a really long video. It's being recorded on the 31st of October. Should hopefully go out the 1st of November. This is Labour kind of face planting on this situation in Gaza and kind of it just escalating really just out of control even further, which was hard to imagine early on. But we're going to be discussing that more into the video. I just want to discuss kind of Labour's abysmal performance, specifically Keir Starmer, in kind of talking about the current situation going on in Gaza. So Starmer again says he understands the calls for a ceasefire, but argued it's not the correct position at the moment. So that's what Brain Dumb comes up with. So, more than 60 MPs, Labour MPs, have called for a ceasefire. Starmer insisted that calling for a humanitarian pause was the only credible option, which is simply not the case, because all you're going to be able to do is, yes, you'll be able to get more aid to people, and it means aid workers are safer. But, as people manage to consume their food and get medicines, they're just going to be bombed again. Like, it doesn't help them. A humanitarian pause is a good idea or a very mid idea, but we need a lot more than this given the situation in Gaza right now. It's simply untenable. It's a very not liberal, kind of like very centrist kind of approach of, a halfway measure. He said a pause would allow aid to get into Gaza, which is true. He argued that a ceasefire would leave Hamas's infrastructure intact, enabling them to carry out future attacks. And the problem is the only way, unless Israel go in there and destroy every single tunnel and find all of the munitions that Hamas have and somehow manage to destroy an ideology, is simply not going to work. The only way you get through these conflicts is to sit down and talk, is to come up with a negotiated solution. That's it. This conflict won't end unless there is a negotiated solution which both sides can agree on. This idea that what Israel doing against the Gazans now is it's kind of similar to what the Americans did in Nam. They just kept dropping bombs everywhere and it didn't work. Israel, I don't know how much success they're having in ground operations, but given the fact that Hamas are mostly in tunnels that they have built, unless you know where these tunnels are and you have enough bunker busters to destroy these tunnels, the only other thing you can do is physically go inside there and try and destroy these tunnels. But it doesn't look like Israel are really doing that. And blowing up the buildings and things like that is not going to help them find the tunnels. All it will do is make it hard to find entry points. Their tactics make no sense here, and all it's doing is leading to more and more civilian deaths, which we'll be talking about. And Starmer growing under increased pressure because the Israel's solution to this is not working. All it is ethnic cleansing, especially their actions in the West Bank with more and more settler operations going on there, stealing more land, killing more people. What Labour have done is just what Labour are saying, from a former, so-called former human rights lawyer, abysmal, shocking display. We've got Andy Burnham, so mayors Sadiq Khan, Andy Burnham, and the Labour Scottish leader Anna Sawar, and a number of frontbenchers are among those who have diverged from the official party line calling for a ceasefire. So put some respect on Sadiq Khan's name, Andy Burnham's name, and Anna Sawar's name. I know Anna Sawar did get some people kind of saying like, he wasn't there from the start and whatever. In this situation, anyone who's on the team, I'll take, apart from anti-Semites or racists. Anyone who's saying, look, we need to call for a ceasefire, I will take them, apart from the worst people in society, or the dodgy people in society. But put some respect on their names. Khan, Burnham, and Anna Sawar, definitely. We'll be talking about Hamza Yusuf in a bit. I've got 2 clips I wanted to discuss for him. Put some respect on his name as well, because he was the first party leader to actually say that we need a ceasefire, so put some respect on his name as well. Following his speech, Starmer was asked if Labour frontbenchers diverging from the position would be sacked. He said the party was unified on wanting to see an, quote, alleviation of this awful situation, end quote. And what that tells you is he hasn't got the guts to sack him, because they have diverged from the party line. He hasn't got the guts to do it because he'd have to sack a lot of them, and this will be another kind of massive internal party struggle. But I think the media are going to keep picking at him over this. I'll be discussing some of the stuff that he said as well. There's just a lot of clips to discuss. I think his policy is just a really crappy half measure. By not backing a full ceasefire, the Labour leader is aligned with the UK government as well as the US and the EU, which again, really mid on this. These countries wouldn't even, these are countries that wouldn't really back a ceasefire. Anyways, the UN resolution that passed, they didn't back it. This again from Starmer, just stupid what he's saying here. This was the speech he gave on the 31st.
Accordance with the law. As to whether each and every act is in accordance with the law, well, that will have to be adjudicated in due course.
Human rights law has no opinion on human rights in the ongoing situation.
I think it's unwise for politicians to stand on stages like this or to sit in television studios and pronounce day by day which acts may or may not be in accordance with international law.
Okay.
The awful attacks on civilians, and I think it's very important that he's held to account and is responsible, and all those that are acting with him know that they too will be held to account. And this is something which we need to make clear now, so that those who are involved at the moment know what the consequences are. There's a gap that we've got to plug, and that is in relation to the aggression of the invasion. That is not something that at the moment can be dealt with by international tribunals, which is why I and others have suggested that we set up a tribunal to deal with this, a bit like the Nuremberg Tribunal, so that...
So here you have the difference. One, he's talking about the situation in Israel and Palestine. The second one, he's talking about the situation between Ukraine and Russia. So in one conflict, we should be setting up an independent tribunal to deal with this, and anyone who's backed it. In the other one, it's we shouldn't be talking about this stuff day to day. You know, that time will come. Okay, buddy. Like I genuinely just it doesn't make any sense, the stuff he's saying here, especially when you compare it to the stuff he said in the last couple of years because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Just, you know, two conflicts that you can't really compare to an extent, but one is an aggressor attacking another group. Using dumb tactics that just don't work. Russia saying that they're there to protect Russian kind of people, ethnic Russians and things like that. I think by how are you doing that by blowing them up? It doesn't make any sense. This from John Sopel is actually a good question. So he says, quote, "Nobody is cheering for Hamas, but the idea that destroying them will lead to a pragmatic solution is just fanciful." End quote. And he's right that the idea that you can destroy Hamas, destroying a terrorist group like this is incredibly difficult. And I'm not saying Israel should sit back and do nothing, but you do need to look at the causes the things that have led to the creation of Hamas. Hamas kind of have said that I think they would release the hostages if they got fuel into Gaza, and Israel have said no. So this idea that all of Hamas are just complete hardline ideologues, I don't think that's fully true. There would be different kind of ideas within that, but they are a scumbag organization. Let's not get it twisted now. But this idea that they're just going to go in there and blow up Hamas is just not going to work, especially since, like I said, they are hiding in the tunnels. A huge number of civilians have died in Gaza, 40% of them being children. That's the definition of Israel's right. Is that the definition of Israel's right to defend itself? And again, like I've said, you don't just because you've been attacked, in a horrific way. Civilians were attacked. Civilians were killed effectively. Does not give you a blank check to do the same to the other side. It does not mean you can just go airstrike everything. They've threatened hospitals, and they've offered no evidence that Hamas have been operating underneath those hospitals. No evidence whatsoever. Surely the international community should be asking, who's your source? Is it Senator Armstrong? Genuinely, who has told you that Hamas are under these hospitals? This kind of, him saying here that the only thing that only Hamas benefits from a ceasefire is simply untrue. It would give Israel a chance to do some actual recon, I think, via drones or whatever, to try and figure out where these tunnels are, because their current operations are not working. Maybe they can figure out where they went wrong, when they were attacked by Hamas, why the security services failed to deal with the attack, things like that. Maybe even figure out longer term solutions on how to deal with tunnels. But, at the moment, this idea that a ceasefire would not, it's not a good idea. A ceasefire is the only good solution, in my opinion, right now. That and negotiations. Pressure building on Starmer. Again, this has been rumbling on for a good while now, to actually do more, to say more, and he's just not doing that. Growing pressure on him, and he's not making the right moves. He's kind of come out more and said that it's clear that the amount of aid and utilities getting into Gaza is completely insufficient to meet the humanitarian emergencies, the need on the ground. But again, the only way we could do that is by putting pressure on Israel to at least get these so-called humanitarian pauses, at least, and make sure they stick to it as well, given that they attack things indiscriminately. Multiple UN workers, journalists have been killed as well. That's one of the tabs I was meant to have open, but I guess we'll just discuss it now quickly. There have been credible accounts of journalists being killed, despite the fact that they have press logos on their vans, and press clothing. They've been targeted as well. Is that Israel's right to defend itself? Attacking hospitals, attacking healthcare workers, first aiders, first responders, attacking the press? Is that within Israel's right to defend itself? Dr. Khan of the Labour Party saying the talk of refugees being sent to Egypt is just an unsustainable option. I don't think that's one the Palestinians want anyways. There are, I think hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in other countries like Jordan, for example, and they have no right to return because Israel have denied them that, even though under international law they have the right to return. And this kind of annoyed me as well. Emily Matlas, generally, I don't know. Actually, you just see too many frauds in the media industry. Maybe I'm one of the frauds as well. But her argument of Starmer doesn't want to say anything that kind of sets any daylight between him and Sunak on the issue.
But actually, on a political level, it is almost impossible for him to say that because he's
about a ceasefire.
Starts to open up the water between Labour and the Conservatives again. And as soon as he has uttered those words and Rishi Sunak hasn't, even if there is pressure from Rishi Sunak's own party to say the same.
There was a minister, like a junior minister, who was sacked because he called for a ceasefire under the Tories, a Tory MP.
Then it becomes a very easy kind of meme for the Tories to say, you see what you've got? Same old, same old. This is Labour slipping back into their own way.
It's simply untrue because the vast majority of people in Britain support a ceasefire. So, if the Tories want to say, see, Labour are anti-Semitic, they're denying Israel's right to defend itself, all they have to say is, look, Israel has a right to defend itself, but the measures they have taken, this is not under international law. And we are a party that believes in international law, whether that's Russia doing what they have done in Ukraine, breaking international law, or whether that's Israel. That's what they could easily say. And this idea doesn't make sense, given that Labour have called for humanitarian pauses, something the Tories haven't called for. So if the Tories were going to do this, they would do it by now. It doesn't make sense. Blinken is also Anthony Blinken, who is the US Secretary of State. I think it would be similar to the Home Office Minister. I think has also called for humanitarian pauses as well. This doesn't make sense. Maybe the Starmer is hiding behind the US here, but it does show you the lack of leadership in this country, how completely spineless that we are, given the fact that we just wait for what the Americans say. It doesn't make sense. What's the point then? We might as well just be a state of America. Here we got Hamza Yusuf, put some respect on his name.
You spoke to the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak yesterday, reiterating the Scottish Government's calls for a ceasefire to allow more aid into the country. The UK Government not joining your calls at the moment. Neither is the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer. Can I just ask what you make of his position at the moment?
I find it infuriating. We're seeing thousands of people...
The audio levels are a bit whack, I'm not going to lie.
...die. Children die. How many more children have to die before a ceasefire is called for? I mean, we're calling for a ceasefire. I cannot understand Sir Keir Starmer's position. I cannot understand the Prime Minister's position. And I ask them, how many more children have to die before you join us and join many across the world, including the United Nations, and call for that ceasefire? Call all parties, not just one party here, call on all parties to commit to a ceasefire for the sake of those innocent children who are suffering so bad.
If you want to see what leadership looks like, you're looking at him. Put some respect on his name, honestly. You got this from Shahab Khan from a few days ago, saying that there are 250 signatures they've written to Starmer. 250 Labour councillors have written to Starmer calling for a ceasefire. We've seen multiple councillors resign as well. The situation he's put himself in is so poor. He's really boxed himself in like an absolute moron, that even the mosque that he went to show he was kind of in tune with the Muslim community, that's backfired as well. The mosque Starmer visited in South Wales is absolutely furious with him and have said the images and messages he posted about the visit gravely misrepresented congruence and the nature of his visit. Starmer saying, I was grateful to hear from the Muslim community of South Islamic Centre. I repeated our calls for all hostages to be released, more humanitarian aid to enter Gaza, and for water and power to be switched back on, and a renewed focus on a two-state solution. I talked about this during the live stream, but how does he expect the Muslim community in South Wales to release the hostages, that Hamas have? It doesn't, we don't know each other like that, man. I don't get what he's doing. Should they phone them or something? Like, genuinely, such a dumb statement. And then, you've got this guy, Matt Zarb Cousin, saying, be right back, off to South Wales Islamic Centre to ask them to release the hostages. I mean, it's just so stupid. And the mosque come out and said, there was a robust and frank conversation which reflected the sentiments Muslim communities are feeling at the time. Members of the community directly challenged Keir on his statements made on Israel and the right to cut food, electricity and water to Gaza, warranting war crimes, as well as the failure to call for an immediate ceasefire. What Starmer said on these things, I don't know. But, the mosque and I think the imam were very upset at the situation because they didn't realise they were going to be used as a PR stunt. The whole thing was meant to be about local politicians visiting the mosque. Something they talk about local representatives perspectives on the issue. Starmer going there short notice, probably because he realised he's really annoyed the parts of the Muslim community here. They say that we wish to stress Keir Starmer's social media posts and images gravely misrepresented our congregants and the nature of the visit. Like, what kind of guy goes to a religious institution and completely misconstrues what happened there? As a PR stunt, like, genuinely, this is like Boris Johnson level nonsense. He went to a mosque and did this. Could you imagine if someone went to a church or a synagogue and did this? Wow, just embarrassing behaviour. Israeli officials saying fuel will not be allowed into Gaza even if Hamas release the hostages. It shows you that this isn't about the hostages. I don't think it ever was, to be honest. This was just a chance for them to inflict punishment on people, honestly. I think that's the only way I see it. And the Wall Street Journal reports that negotiations for the release of the 50 hostages fell apart because Hamas demanded the delivery of fuel into Gaza. Now, these families who have had to go and try and negotiate themselves for their release of their family members. Now, imagine you're an Israeli whose family member has been taken or friend has been taken, and you see this. Just astonishing. And this is one of the things that he talked about, because this goes into what Israel's motives are here, which is not to free the hostages, as they said. If they wanted to release hostages, but blowing up the place indiscriminately is not how you save hostages. It doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. What you need to do is send in a team to get them, or you have to open up negotiations to get the hostages back safely. This doesn't make sense. This is the thing I was talking about. And the other thing I wanted to kind of add to this tweet was that he tweeted this on October the 22nd, the stupid tweet, right? And then underneath on the 23rd, he adds, I was questioned by members. I was deeply moved to hear their pain and horror at the suffering of civilians in Gaza. I made it clear it has never been my view that Israel had the right to cut off food, water, or medicines. International law must be followed. But that's what's happened, though. That's the problem. And so surely he should have condemned that, no? I think this one got hit with a community note as well. It don't make sense. And when we listen to his the initial clip, right, and you can see Labour's excuse for this was Starmer was answering a question before this, which doesn't make sense because he ends it and then he's asked a new question. You can see he kind of starts off talking here. So that's where the question ends. The whatever question they were talking about.
A siege is appropriate. Cutting off power, cutting off water.
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation. Obviously, everything.
And he says everything should be done according to international law. And, there are people who are debating whether a siege is where you can justify siege under international law. But, the worst is that a siege is, by definition, a collective punishment. You're stopping certain things from getting out, people, goods, and whatever. That's the whole point of a siege. You control what comes in and what comes out. Maybe you can get away with it if you don't, block off foods and medicines. But that's what we saw happening. So, for him to say, Israel does have that right to defend itself in the context of being a question of, food and medicines being stopped here, it doesn't make any sense. And, his defense of this is so Weasley, and he gets hit with a community note.
This question, because I know that LBC clip has been widely shared and caused real concern and distress in some Muslim communities.
And you were so concerned by this, it took you 9 days to offer, around 9 days to offer clarification.
Let me be clear about what I was saying and what I wasn't saying.
It took you 9 days to figure out.
I was saying Israel had the right to self-defense, and when I said that right, it was that right to self-defense. I was not saying that Israel had the right to cut off water, food, fuel, or medicines.
And yet people came to that conclusion.
On the contrary, for over a week now, I have been leading this charge, calling.
It's very windy in this interview. Don't do outdoor interviews, people. Not in this time of year.
For that humanitarian aid to come in. We all know there are, innocent civilians in Gaza in a humanitarian crisis, 1 million children. That aid urgently needs to get in. So I was saying,
surely we should call for a ceasefire so aid can get in, so civilians can get out.
Yes, they have the right to self-defense. That right they do have, but not the right to withhold that humanitarian aid that needs to get in. It is now absolutely urgent, and that's why I've been calling for this for over a week. So I'm very pleased.
It's not even true. I don't think he did call for it over a week.
Be able to clarify precisely what I was saying in that LBC clip.
It seems like it was set up so the interviewer would tee him up for that question. But point being is, big man, you've got Twitter, you have a media apparatus, you could have clarified it yourself. Like, for him to go out and do this, just so dumb. It took him 9 days. What a brain dumb idiot. And then you got this from Emily Thornberry here, which Again, this was what Labour's position was. You can't deny it, because this interview was after the LBC clip.
Do you think cutting off food, water and electricity is within international law?
I think that Israel has an absolute right to defend itself against terrorism.
That's not the question I asked.
It is an answer to the question that you've asked, and I think it's an appropriate one at this time.
So, what she's saying, she was asked about it. Do you think Israel has the right to do these things? Let's go back in.
Do you think cutting off food, water and electricity is within international law?
She says Israel does have that right. So, if it's not the case that Starmer doesn't think this, and Emily Thornberry has breached what Labour's position is, because collective responsibility does exist, even in the shadow cabinet, she should be sacked. No? Was Emily Thornberry sacked? No. It goes to show this was Labour Party position. She's genuinely briefed quite well on what the party's position is. And there you go. This idea of people have taken it out of context and whatever, it's nonsense. Nonsense. If it's the case they were taken out of context, please tell us what the context was. Please explain what they meant by these comments. That when they were asked about cutting off food, cutting off medicine, they said Israel does have that right. Please answer us what the context is. Shocking. Lisa Nandy was asked about it. Victoria Derbyshire responding saying the problem is it took him 9 days to issue the clarification. Just embarrassing behaviour, really. This comms team is just abysmal. You've got Labour MP Yasmin Qureshi, who is on the front bench, saying, quote, "This is a collective punishment of the Palestinian people in Gaza, ellipses. How many innocent Palestinians must die before this PM calls for a humanitarian ceasefire," end quote. And, you can put the same question to Starmer. Obviously, the Prime Minister has way more power than Starmer does and way more clout that if he calls for a ceasefire, Israel are more likely to listen. If we said, look, we're going to cut off weapon supplies to you, that's going to have far more of an effect than Keir Starmer would. But we need to see growing international pressure. That's the only thing that can help stop this right now, or at least try to. That's the most important thing. It's not always about being right or being wrong or, winning or losing. Sometimes it's about doing what's right morally, even if you lose, even if you can't get the result you want, which is a ceasefire, at least a ceasefire. You have to try. That's the minimum I expect from any politician. Even if there's a chance of losing, even if there's a chance of being ignored, you have to try. And maybe you can get those humanitarian pauses that they keep talking about if you start the call with a ceasefire and you force them to compromise. Maybe that's the only thing we can do here. Just baffles me some of these statements they're making. Starmer is engaged with real operations to stop 4 of his shadow ministers from resigning. Apparently, the ones on resignation watch were Sarah Owen, Rachel Hopkins. These were 2 of the ones that were looking like going, it's not happened, so I don't think this will happen. This post from the October the 25th. But you can see here's a very, very deep concern within even the shadow cabinet that Starmer is not on the right path here. And a load of resignations, 4 or 5, will be very damaging for him. This from Rachel Sharvey, someone who I have a lot of respect for and is always worth listening to.
I don't know what he's being guided by.
She's talking about Starmer.
But what I know is definitely the case is that he has no moral backbone right now. And the people who he's listening to do not know what they're talking about. This is a really low bar. It really is. All we are saying is, can you just ask Israel to comply with humanitarian law and international law? And we're asking this of a guy who's a human rights lawyer, for crying out loud. If he cannot tell the difference, if he cannot summon the will right now to say, my understanding of human rights law and the basic rules of engagement is that you do not respond to a war crime with another war crime. And by the way, that answers the question you asked Ali. You do not starve people of water and fuel and food, commit a war crime, because a war crime has been committed against you. That is the basics of the engagement of the rule of law when it comes to war. And that's why that's not happening. And that's why that's a war crime for Israel to do that. And for Keir Starmer to not be able to say very clearly, that is a breach of humanitarian law. You have to call for a ceasefire, which, by the way, there's overwhelming majority British support for. You have to lift the siege on Gaza so humanitarian aid can go in.
And 100% everything you said is facts. You cannot commit a war crime in response to someone committing a war crime on you, and you have to lift the siege. You have to allow medicines to go in freely. For them to, for UN workers to be killed, it tells you that Israel has no idea what they're hitting. No idea. If they're targeting Hamas, Hamas UN employees, what is going on here? I genuinely do not understand. And we're talking about that a bit more. You know, there's more kind of Labour trying to come out here and really go full court press on this clarification. You know, West String saying, quote, "It was never Starmer's intention to give the impression that we support measures to cut off power and water," end quote. And, you know, you definitely gave that impression. You definitely gave it. Here's from Brain Dumb here saying, "For the heart of understanding, a ceasefire in Gaza would be the right policy if we can enforce it. But Starmer is saying a ceasefire is not the right policy. And he's saying, but we can't. So demanding it only means Israel tell us to sod off. Oh, that's okay then. You know, we shouldn't oppose anyone. You know, when we when we criticize the Tories, we shouldn't bother because they'll just tell us to sod off, and we can't try and, you know, get any results anywhere. We shouldn't bother protesting because they'll just tell us to sod off." Right, genuinely just brain dumb here, so stupid. He's made another video talking about how, actually we'll talk about that in a minute. This from a Norwegian physician talking about the other hospital, the Al Shifa hospital, which Israel claiming that is a command center for Hamas.
To put on the table the proofs and the evidence that there is a control and command center for the Palestinian resistance in Shifa hospital. We have heard these claims since 2009. We have twice been threatened to leave Shifa Hospital in 2009 and 2014 because the Israelis were going to bomb it because it was a command center. Now, I have been working in Shifa for 16 years on and off, in very hectic periods. I've been able to walk freely around. I take lots of pictures. I video film. I've been sleeping in the hospital during bombardment. I've been all over. I've never been restricted, controlled. Nobody has ever controlled my picture and documentation material. So, well, if there is a command center, show us. You have pictures and X-ray films of all Gaza, all the tunnels, everything. So why is it that these 16 years of threats that Shifa is a command center has not been given any evidence at all that it de facto is? Now, if it was a military command center, I would not work there because I obey to the Geneva Convention, number one. Number two, if the Israelis claim that this is a mixed military-civilian target, because obviously it is civilian, with tens of thousands of people gathering there and 2,000 patients being treated. If it is a mixed military-civilian target, the civilian precautions take priority over the military. So in accordance with the Geneva Convention, you can't bomb hospitals unless they have very clear military functions. So to me, this is all part of this immense intimidation of the Palestinian people in Gaza. They are threatened with leaflets from the planes and the helicopters. They are threatened by phone calls. They are threatened by, you know, if you stay in northern Gaza now, we define you as a terrorist. What is this? 2023, 2.5 million, 2.2 million people, civilian, unarmed people being killed. A child killed every 10 minutes. So far today, the number of killed Palestinian children is 3,324, and there are missing 2,062 Palestinian children in Gaza. That's 5,300 Palestinian children killed in 3 weeks. And I asked President Biden, what kind of president are you? And the vice president, do you have children? Do you accept that this is a war? Do you accept that your supported Israeli army is killing by the thousands children? For heaven's sake, let's have a ceasefire. Let's lift the siege of Gaza. Let's let in supplies and international teams to work. My colleagues are overburdened. They have worked night and day for 3 weeks now. This has to stop.
And this is what I'm saying. Like, you know, this argument that Israel has intelligence or whatever on these areas, right? How have you managed to kill this many children if you know what you're targeting? It doesn't make sense. You know, you have access to targeted munitions, things like that. This whole thing of, oh, these are legitimate targets or whatever. I think they should have to show some evidence. I think they should have to go to the UN and produce whatever evidence they have that this hospital has Hamas working underneath it. I would want to see it. I think the international community should push for that. I think Joe Biden should push for that. I think Sunak should push for that. I think every government should push, say, show us your evidence then of it being. You don't have to show us how you got it. You know, I don't need to see the workings out here, but I want to see the exact evidence you have that there are tunnels underneath this hospital, because I think their sources center Armstrong on this one. I'll be honest. There was I think a pogrom. I don't know how you would describe it. In Dagestan, where there was a bunch of people in Dagestan looking for Israelis coming from a plane. I think the plane was meant to be arriving from Tel Aviv, and these people attacked essentially raided the airport in searching for him. You got this absolute brain dump here, Paul Mason saying, "So is this Dagestan pogrom a good pogrom or a bad one?" And then here he kind of mentions various, I think, Jewish people that work for Novara Media, and I think that him, just as this guy Barnaby Rain says, I think you taunting Jews about anti-Semitic attacks to tar and target our anti-racist support for Palestine is one of the most shameful and embarrassing lows you have ever reached. And this guy, he knows many lows. Trust me, Paul Mason, absolute fraud, wants an MP seat desperately. There was something I was going to discuss out here. It is. It would make more sense to do it in this order. So a shadow cabinet member was misquoted. So he said, "Until all people, Israelis and Palestinians between the river and the sea can live in peaceful liberty," end quote. But what they had originally said was... what they had originally misquoted him as him saying between the river and the sea Palestine will be free, which some people see as an anti-Semitic chant, some people don't. I think you always got to be careful with those. But a shadow cabinet minister who backs Starmer's line says, because this Andy McDonald, he was sacked for, he's had the whip withdrawn, I think, or he's under some sort of suspension. He said, quote, "People are feeling pressure. They think a ceasefire would solve the conflict. But people haven't thought it through. You see children dying and you're going to have an emotional reaction," end quote. This person must be a real sicko if he said this. Whoever has said this. Obviously, you are going to have an emotional reaction to children dying. But why are the children dying? That's the question. It's if they're attacking legitimate military targets, there shouldn't be child deaths in the thousands. That's the question that they should have asked the shadow cabinet minister. Absolute fraud, this geezer is. So this person here, Andy McDonald, has been put under suspension based on something he didn't say. So clearly brain dumb Starmer had no idea what he's doing. Complete fraudulence from the night again. And this from Schneider Home explaining the some of the context behind the chant.
Say from the river to the sea.
Oh, that's a bit loud.
The Palestine will be free is in any way frightening or anti-Semitic, because it is not. Palestinians between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea are dispossessed and denied. To say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is a call for justice for all people living there. And it does not mean a reversal of the current situation, where instead of the Palestinians being occupied, being living under apartheid and now being bombed and having war crimes committed against them, it will be Israelis. It does not mean that. It means all people living together, as Andy McDonald said, in peaceful liberty.
What do you think the impact of his removing the whip from Andy McDonald will be then, James Schneider?
I think he looks ludicrous, because it is plainly ludicrous. You endorse war crimes and you're fine in his Labour Party.
So let's just... endorsing war crimes is a very, very big accusation.
I'm referring to his LBC interview and also to Emily Thornberry's interview sitting in this very studio, probably in this very chair.
I think, Keir Starmer has...
So, the chance some people to use it, I think in an anti-Semitic way, he's clearly saying he doesn't see the issue. I would always be careful with that, but it's not even what he said. He didn't say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. He said until all peoples, Israelis and Palestine between the river and the sea can live in peaceful liberty. So it's completely different. And Starmer, once again, this kind of desperation to not be seen as anti-Semitic has gone completely the opposite way in a sense, and he's gone too far. I think the pendulum swung way too far, and anything that anyone says is being, that word will lose meaning. And it'd be a very dangerous situation when that happens. This from Mehdi Hassan talking about Reporters Without Borders, saying, quote, "Video investigation for death of Reuters reporter Islam Abdullah in Lebanon." He says the journalist vehicle was explicitly targeted. So here you have more reports of journalists being targeted by the Israeli military. So please tell me, when was it okay to attack civilians? When was it When was it okay to attack journalists? When was it okay to steal territory in the West Bank? When were these things okay? Or is this all part of Israel's right to defend itself? Genuine question. This from Rami Ayari, saying that there is a member, Craig Mokhibo, resigns in protest over the timidity of key parts of the UN system on issues pertaining to Palestinian rights. He says this is a textbook case of genocide, and then he blames kind of Western people kind of for the situation. saying that they've essentially enabled Israel, and they were seeing a resignation over this because the UN system isn't built to deal with built to deal with crises because of the veto system. You can pass resolutions all you want, but unless the United Nations Security Council passes the resolution, it doesn't matter, because all it takes is one country to veto it, and there are multiple members of the UNSC. It's just such a dumb system, honestly. More from Hamza Yusuf, talking about the current situation with his extended family.
Just this morning, before I came to this event, I heard from my mother-in-law, the situation is still dire. They're alive, which is what we keep hoping and praying for every single night. But the situation is really dire. They're down to, I would say, not even clean water. They have this kind of salty water. It's probably come, no doubt, from the sea. It's not great to be drinking. In fact, they shouldn't be drinking it. They're using it where they can to clean dishes. They have little food, and of course just haven't slept for, I would say, well over 3 weeks now as the bombing continues. And that's why my call, not just for my family but for all of the people who are suffering, is for that ceasefire to allow humanitarian aid in, not just a trickle but significant humanitarian aid in, and to allow those people who want to leave and need to leave to be able to get out of Gaza.
You know, and 100% he's right. You know, like, this is a situation with his family. This is a situation for a lot of people that would be in Gaza, that they have had, no sleep, incredible crowded houses, minimal supplies, and the question is, what did they do wrong? Apart from living there, what did they do wrong? Genuine question. What have they done wrong? This is collective punishment. These are people who should not be victims of this war, and they are. You know, this is what happens. Potentially you're going to have people die of dehydration or starvation if that hasn't happened already. That's collective punishment. This is a war crime. Just a couple of bits more. I wanted to discuss this as well. Former congressman says his family members were killed in Gaza Church Plus. So this is Justin Amash, the first Palestinian American to serve in the US Congress, says he was grieving after several of his relatives were killed and a Greek Orthodox church in Gaza that authorities report were hit by an Israeli strike. So again, you know, what were his family? Were Hamas underneath the church? You know, I say it in jest, but like, what possible justification was there to blow up a church? I don't get it. I genuinely don't. He's saying, I was really worried about this. With great sadness, I've confirmed now that several of my relatives, including Viola and Yara, pictured here, were killed at Saint, I can't pronounce that word, Orthodox Church in Gaza, where they had been sheltering. And what did they do wrong? What did they do wrong? I don't get it. I just, you know, for anyone to be not calling for a ceasefire at this point, despite the mounting civilian deaths, is just astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. That we've already discussed. That's kind of the end of the video, I guess. This is cowardice at the highest level, you know. I expect this kind of nonsense from the Tories, I really do, but from Labour, especially a former human rights lawyer, to be, you know, saying some of this kind of stuff is just deeply concerning. Deeply concerning that they think the Overton window is in such a position where it's okay for them to not be against war crimes when certain countries do it. I mean, look at this. He's very clear in this statement about Russia, saying that, you know, there has to be some sort of new tribunal set up to deal with the war crimes that they have committed. And he's absolutely clear that there were war crimes committed by Vladimir Putin and the Russians. But when it comes to Israel saying, look, we can't, you know, I'm not here to give you day-to-day analysis and whatever, like, bro, like, you know, this also idea that we can't criticize him because he's a human rights lawyer. He was a human rights lawyer. He knows more than us. Does he? Does he know more than the United Nations? Does he know more than Doctors Without Borders? I don't. Who does he know? At what bar? You know, how high up the human rights chain do you have to be able to criticize Starmer? Do you have to work for Amnesty International? I don't understand. You know, the arguments people use here is just appeal to authority. Makes me sad. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. It's been a really long video, almost about 40 minutes. So if you have managed to watch it, I appreciate it, even if you haven't made it to the end or whatever. But I just despair. Anyways, I'll catch you in the next one.